All right, let's get right to it. Brian Billick, Super Bowl winning head coach, and our NFL insider on all things that are important in the NFL. Coach, good morning. Hope you're doing well on this Tuesday. You're looking sharp.
Good morning.
Hey, I got a question for you, and I'm sure you'll never forget this. You were offensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings. All of a sudden, you interview and bang, you're named the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. Outside of the emotion, the thankfulness, the joy, the excitement, etc., in terms of order of business, what happens for Brian Callahan? He's going to be named the coach. What takes place immediately?
It's amazing. It's an amazing process because you go through this roller coaster of emotions. You worked your entire life to get this opportunity. You get it. And you go through the interview process and you're very detailed. And this is how I'm going to do this. And this is how we're going to rally. This is how I'm going to build the team. This is how we're going to change the culture and yada, yada, yada. And then you get the job. And then you sit down at that desk for the very first time and go, holy crap, what do I do now?
Yeah.
It really does come cascading down. First order of business is he's going to make a beeline down to the Senior Bowl because that's primarily where you put your staff together. Yeah, that's the thing I did. I was immediately after the news conference announcing me, I was on a plane down to Mobile at the time, and because that's where all the coaches are. And you already have an idea of what your main staff is going to be, and you've already had those kind of conversations. But you finalize that, and you then fill in because there's other positions that you haven't gone that far down yet. You will interview likely or visit with guys on the existing staff to give them some respect and say, okay, and there may be some that you want to keep on the staff. Marvin Lewis was the only one I kept from the previous staff, which obviously was a good hire. And I hadn't known Marvin when I hired him. So all that process begins, and then you're back to Nashville, and it's because you look up and the combine's 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away once the Senior Bowl is done. So you're really scrambling around to get the coaches in place, going to get to the combine, coordinate with the existing and whatever is existing there in terms of the personnel department, regardless of what changes are going to be made after the draft, and start coordinating that integration between personnel and your coaching staff. So there's and you haven't even begun to talk about putting the playbook together and the X's and O's. I mean, it's fast and furious.
All right, what about the decision? Because ultimately I want to get to where the Bengals might be in making a decision to replace Callahan. But bear with me here for a second. So you're talking about all of those things. If you're Brian Callahan, you've never had a chance to call plays as an offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. Is one of the biggest decisions, or walk us through the decision that he's going to have to make as a head coach as to whether or not he's going to call plays.
Yeah. Well, whether you're someone, typically it's a coordinator that has called plays that gets a head job. And regardless of whether you have or not, one of your first fundamental decisions is am I going to be a head coach that orchestrates and oversees everything, or am I going to try to be the offensive coordinator as well? It's an amazing process because when you're a coordinator and you're living it, it's 24/7, 365 days a year. You are totally obsessed with it. You're totally integrated with it, and that's all you can think about. And then you get a head job and go, oh, and I'll do this other thing too, which is kind of silly. But different guys do it different ways. I started out calling the plays, and then I relinquished to a coordinator, ended up taking it back. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and there's no right or wrong way. If he wants to be his own coordinator, having no experience calling in the NFL, I don't know if that's a limitation. He may very well decide I'm going to get a coordinator in place, and I'll oversee it, but he's going to be more than coordinator in name, and he's going to call the offense. So that's the first really big decision he has to make. And if he decides I'm going to be the coordinator and I am going to call it, then you got to find a very good number two that's going to be basically the quasi head coach. I call it the 3 a.m. rule. When you wake up 3 a.m. in the morning, what are you thinking about? And if he's thinking about, do I put the fullback in the flat or do I run this and when do I call that? You're the coordinator. Who's waking up at 3 a.m. thinking about personnel, thinking about practice structure, thinking about all those little details that you have to as a head coach? You better have a strong right-hand man if you're going to be waking up at 3 and thinking about what depth the Z is going to be on 22ZN versus, well, what's the practice structure? Where are deficiency personnel? What's the draft? There's a lot of other things. And to think that you could just do both is a fatal error.
Okay. Now, if you're sitting here in Cincinnati, Dan Pitcher has been the quarterback's coach since Joe Burrow was drafted. Obviously, he is very highly thought of around the National Football League. He's never been a coordinator, but he's got interviews lined up this week with 3 different teams I mentioned a moment ago. He's supposed to get on a plane, in fact, tonight to leave Cincinnati to go to Las Vegas. All right, now you're Mike Brown or Katie Blackburn. And here you have this guy who Joe Burrow speaks glowingly about. Clearly, Zach Taylor has talked glowingly about. Yet, unless something changes, and you alluded this a minute ago, you would be getting the coordinator's job in Cincinnati, but not being a play caller. So, would you rather be in that position? I'm asking you personally. Would you rather be in the position of, okay, I got Joe Burrow, I got Jamar Chase, maybe I got T. Higgins, I got all these guys, right? But I'm not calling plays. Or I have a chance to go New England, Raiders, Saints, where I will be the play caller. Is that a big part of the decision? If the money is equal in all of them, would that be a determining factor for you?
Sure, but follow the path. You could make the case. Well, I just saw a coordinator in Cincinnati who was not called to plays get a head job. So obviously that path, if he and assumingly they think he's a good coach, he knows what he's stepping into. I'm assuming that Taylor's going to hold on to the play calling. He could make the case, well, I stay in Cincinnati, I've got a great quarterback, and I just saw the guy above me take that path to a head coaching position. So you could see that, and it would justify it. More traditionally would be, well, if I really want to become a head coach, I got to go someplace where I do it all. Now, the places you just named, that'd be great, but none of them have a quarterback. So now you've got to weigh that against, do I stay with Joe Burrow on a path that I just saw the guy in front of me get a head job, or do I go do the coordinator thing, earn my chops that way, but I got to do the 50-50 crapshoot of, do we find a quarterback? Because if you don't, then you just become the captain of a sinking ship, and that path to a head coach isn't going to happen because you're not going to be very good as a coordinator. You're only as good as your quarterback is. So that's kind of the calculation he's going to have to look at as to ultimately, if indeed your number one priority is what's my best path to becoming a head coach, the fact that you just saw the guy in front of you, I would think staying in Cincinnati would be a viable choice for him.
Okay, but now let's put you in Zach Taylor's shoes. Like every coach, I mean, heck, you used to listen to people burying you on the radio. I remember you telling me stories. You're driving home and your team just scores 45 points in a game. You're the coordinator in Minnesota, and they're lighting you up to get fired, right? So if you're Zach Taylor, he's come under criticism, like all do, for his play calling. But he's come under a lot of criticism here in Cincinnati about his play calling. Do you think he would be less reluctant, or you, if you were in his position, would you be less reluctant to think about giving up the play calling duties to a guy who has never done it before? In fact, he's never been a coordinator before.
It's interesting, that dynamic of being a play caller, and I always find it interesting that Zach Taylor's taken his team to a Super Bowl and is great, but all of a sudden now he can't call plays. No, it doesn't work that way. And frankly, actually physically calling the plays is overblown. Yeah, you have to have a good offense and a good quarterback, and it has to be orchestrated. But and all of us think we have a special intuition about play calling, and we don't. You just don't. If he needs to give it up, and he may very well be. Mike Shanahan, a lot of it is just fun. I mean, play calling is fun. You like it. But at some point you recognize, you know what, I need to be more of just the head coach. I need to push that individual attention to detail to and embolden the right guy. If you really believe he's the guy, that your quarterback coach is going to be the coordinator, can make the calls and make the plays. And yeah, he'll be as good as you are. because the game plan is you're going to have input on the game plan. And you all know what your first call is on 1st and 10, 2nd and 10 after a run, 2nd and 10 after an incompletion, 2nd medium after a run, explosion when you first get to the 40-yard line. What's my first call on the goal line? That's all orchestrated during the week. Who physically calls it is sometimes over-romanticized. So, yes, he may be at a point where I'm still going to oversee the offense just like I oversee the defense. I'm going to be the head coach, but I'm going to let him orchestrate the details. And that's probably not a bad idea because there comes a point where, I mean, it's a lot and it can wear you out. And you probably need to bring a little more focus on the day-to-day of being that head coach, monitoring what's going on with your team on a daily basis, and let the minutia of the details offensively go to another guy. But you're still going to be involved with it and still make the calls to a certain degree. So, yes, that's easily done and probably not a bad path to linger and hold on to. No, I'm going to do it. You know, like Mike McCarthy took it back in Dallas, okay? And the result was very good. But what did he give up as the head coach and why he was almost fired this year? So there is a give and take here, and some guys are good at it. And again, Zach Taylor's going to have to decide whether this other guy is capable or not, and he likely is. But he has to make that decision, and turning it over would not be a bad idea. Not because he's not a good play caller, but simply because through the maturation as a head coach in the organization, that's probably something you should do.
All right, last thing I want to ask you about is this, because we discussed this a little bit yesterday. Knowing the pitcher is so young, he has not been a play caller. He clearly has been a part of putting the game plan together along with Callahan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's been argued that oftentimes it's good to bring in a quote-unquote fresh pair of eyes, right? I mean, the Ravens this year bring in Todd Monken from the University of Georgia. And they have just exploded under him. And that offense, they just got an unbelievable team. I don't need to tell you. Is this the situation with the Bengals where maybe they should consider that? What are the pros and cons of, yeah, we got a guy that our quarterback really likes. Yeah, he's worked with him every day he's been in the league. But then there's that chance that somebody else comes in here and they could put a whole different, light on this offense.
Sure, and that's a valid perception. Anytime you bring those fresh eyes, that fresh energy, that and it would energize the team. It would energize Joe Burrow, regardless of the relationship with this guy as a quarterback coach. That can be true. The age thing is not. We're in right now. All the head coaches in the league. If you've had lunch with Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan, then you're a candidate for a head coaching job. The guy in Miami is what? He's 14, 15 years old?
Right.
I mean, this is the way of the NFL now. We want these young genius gurus to come in so yeah, it's a matter of what coach. To bring in somebody from the outside, fresh eyes is not a bad idea. You could still keep the existing guy, make him a coordinator, and still bring in a new quarterback coach, or bring in somebody else off to bring that next perspective. That's not a bad way to go. You don't have to bring it in as the coordinator per se. So there's a lot of ways to accomplish what you're talking about.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I don't want to take up any more of your time. We can talk about all the championship games this weekend. If you were picking the games this weekend, the Baltimore-Kansas City game, it's the last thing I'll ask you. I mean, goodness gracious. What a game that has a chance to be, right?
Yeah. And you're right. The Ravens are playing lights out. But it is Patrick Mahomes. A big thing there. And yeah, at the end of the day, the Ravens are favored. It's interesting. They're only favored by 3.5. So you get 3 for being at home. So really, they're favored by half a point, which I find a little tight, as well as the Ravens have played. The biggest factor to me where the Ravens, where Kansas City could, obviously with Mahomes, and the defense is playing pretty good. Spagnuolo will have a good plan for Lamar. The fact that Kansas City is a physical running team now with Pacheco, could they be one of the few teams that really do challenge, because they've got to configure to take care of Mahomes and Pacheco get hot running the ball? That could happen. I'm not betting on it. I'm betting on the Ravens. But that unique combination of Kansas City coming in, that if they win, it's going to be because Pacheco and that line are running the ball well, and then Mahomes does 4 or 5 magic plays like he does. But the Ravens also, the way they like to bring pressure. You got to. I joked about this on a show the other day. If I'm the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, if I'm John Harbaugh, I go to McDonald or the defensive coordinator and go, look,
Yep.
I don't care if we lose by 50 points. I do not want to see Travis Kelce catch the ball. Okay, that's job one. That's that. Don't let Travis. Patrick Mahomes is going to do some things. They got some other guys, but it amazes me how open Travis Kelce still gets at key times. I don't care if you have to put 3 guys on him. I don't care what you got to do. Stop that guy, and then Lamar will run. Yeah, so there's a price to pay, but you cannot let Travis Kelce beat you. So I'm going to be interested to see if Kelce can get open, and if Pacheco can run the ball. If not, if either one of those things doesn't happen, then I think the Ravens are a slam dunk.
Okay, well, then I will ask you about the NFC game because, Bill Walsh is one of your mentors. You worked for him 100 years ago, and you were out there in San Francisco. It's where you started your career, coaching career. I think the Lions have a chance in this game. It's a big duh. They're in the NFC Championship game. But they do some things that can give teams some fits. You think they have any chance out there in California?
I would love to see that happen because, as we know, Detroit's the black hole. Things just go in there and disappear for decades.
Yeah, right.
And the fact they're in the championship game, and this is a personal bias for me, only because I was at the Baltimore-Detroit game. In Baltimore, they were inducting Terrell Suggs in the Ring of Honor. Baltimore just it was 38-6, and it was not that close.
Right.
I can't get that image out of my mind. As great as Jared Goff has been, going on the road to San Francisco. Now, Purdy looked a little shaky, early on, but at the end, I think the totality of that defense, what they'll be able to do against the Detroit defense, it'd be great. I just don't see it happening. I think it's going to be Baltimore and San Francisco. Because that San Francisco team's pretty good. And even that game, I'm jumping ahead here, and they'll say, well, they killed them in San Francisco. Well, that's with 5 interceptions. This is a stupid thing to say, but if Purdy doesn't turn the ball over like he did against Baltimore the first time, they were moving the ball, and they were handling Baltimore pretty good. This could be a hell of a game. But as much as I'd like to see it, and it's a great story, I just don't see Detroit going west and San Francisco not playing well and getting that done.
Okay. All right. Coach, thanks for your time, my friend. Great to see you as always. Have a great rest of your day.
Sounds good.